Hi everybody, I'm Nicole with Together We Will of Cincinnati and Southwest Ohio. I am here with Greg Landsman, candidate for Cincinnati City Council. Also with me today are Betsy and Jessica from ASL program of Cincinnati State. That was not coherent, but you know what I mean. And we are hooking up to all sorts of other groups who are going to be broadcasting this live feed. While we are doing that, I'm just going to review the procedures for commenting. If you would like to ask Greg a question live, please do so. We would love to hear from you. Just click on the feed link or the video, and you will have an option to comment. Comment with your question. We have people behind the scenes here who will see the question and relay it to me here on my computer, and I will stop what I am doing, which is asking other questions, and ask. Please don't hesitate. We sincerely would love to hear your questions. Keep in mind that if you miss any part of this broadcast, we will record it and paste the link on our page. You can always catch the whole thing later if you need to. And do keep an eye out for our other events in our series. We have interviewed quite a few other candidates. We have a few more coming up. And last week we had Q&A with Rob Richardson and Yvette Simpson. So if you want to catch up on those, please do so. How are we doing on people checking in? People coming in? Good.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay, good.
A couple of shares. I think we're almost ready. Hold on.
Great. I am just going to let all of you know that if you want to follow all of the Cincinnati City Council candidates in one fell swoop, you can subscribe to our Twitter list. If you go to @TWWSWOH, that's Together We Will Southwest Ohio, and go to our lists page, you can click on the Cincinnati City Council candidates list and click subscribe, and you will have all of them in your Twitter feed. Okay. All right, we're about ready to start. For those of you just joining us, keep in mind that if you click on the link to the video feed or on the video itself, you can comment with your questions live, and we would be more than happy to ask. Please don't hesitate. I am going to give you a brief introduction. Okay. Everybody, this is Greg Landsman. He is running for Cincinnati City Council. He's a Cincinnati native, and he went to Cincinnati Public Schools. You went to Ohio University.
Yep.
What was your degree in?
Economics and political science.
Whoa, 2 degrees. Okay, great. And then you went to Harvard.
Divinity school, yeah.
Divinity school, very impressive. And that's a graduate degree, yes?
Yep.
Okay.
Master's in theological studies.
Very nice. And you taught high school.
High school Spanish.
And where were you living when you taught high school?
I taught high school Spanish in Southern Virginia, in Gloucester County. I had been, I took some time off of politics. I had been in politics. My career started in politics, and decided to take some time off, and did all kinds of things, including teaching, which was, quite frankly, one of the more difficult jobs I've ever had.
So when you say that you work with kids, you have some experience actually working with kids. Great. And when you returned to Ohio, you were appointed director of the Governor's Office on Faith-Based Initiatives.
Yep. So Ted Strickland had just become governor, and the office was actually kind of in a tough spot. It was the previous group had mismanaged the funds to the extent that the state had put the office through an investigation, and there was an audit, and the governor had asked me to come up and sort of right the ship to make sure that the audit was clean, and that that everything was put back in order, which we did. I mean, we rebuilt the office and began to invest the resources that it had in anti-poverty programs, particularly those that focused on children. So we invested a lot of funding in effective programs like summer learning and enrichment work, mentoring, fatherhood initiatives, efforts that were helping those recently incarcerated come back and get back on their feet, find work. So it was a great experience in terms of, one, taking something that wasn't working and fixing it, and two, then using it to do a lot of good. We invested tens of millions of dollars in programs that helped a lot of families move out of poverty.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, and then you chaired an Ohio Anti-Poverty Task Force that combats child poverty.
Yeah, so, you know, the poverty situation in the city is pretty dire, in my opinion, and throughout the state, it's not nearly as bad, but it's bad. And so the governor wanted to look at every option, and so we convened a significant panel of experts, lawmakers, and folks from the administration, and those living in poverty. And we spent a year and a half looking at best practices from around the country and the state to identify a series of recommendations that Ohio should be pursuing in order to fundamentally reduce poverty in the state. And some of those were enacted. For example, Medicaid requires a period of time for a family to be determined eligible, but that family may have someone who's sick and needs immediate medical care, and so we were able to get what's called presumptive eligibility done, meaning that once you've sort of signed up, you're presumed to be eligible so that you can get health care immediately, as opposed to waiting 6, 7, 8 months, which I think made a huge difference. So, yeah.
Okay. And your big project in Cincinnati has been Preschool Promise.
Yeah, so about 4 years ago, I was running an effort called the Stripe Partnership, which is an education advocacy group that focuses on the entire cradle-to-career continuum, and we spent a lot of time looking at data and best practices and determined that the most significant thing we could do to help children in the city was to provide 2 years of high-quality preschool for children in Cincinnati who otherwise couldn't afford it. And we started out with just the idea. The idea was every child in the city deserves 2 years of high-quality preschool. We know it works. It makes a huge difference, especially for those children living in poverty. If they have those extra 2 years before kindergarten, before school starts, they'll show up prepared, socially, emotionally, developmentally, academically, and statistically speaking, they do much better. They're reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade, and they graduate. And so it's an investment with one of the highest returns of any public investment. And so we got to work. We started organizing and doing a lot of advocacy and communications work to raise awareness around the importance of high-quality preschool. And ultimately, we were able to get it on the ballot alongside much-needed funding for our public schools, and it passed overwhelmingly in November, the largest margin of any school levy. And it's now getting put together. It's in the process of getting up and running, and children in the city who otherwise wouldn't be in a position to access high-quality preschool will be able to do so this fall.
Good news?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah,
Good.
Great.
And Greg has won several awards recently. Community Action Agency's Bridge Builder Award. Yes.
Yeah.
Strength in Education Award from the local chapter of the National Action Network.
Yeah.
And the Cradle to Career Champion Award from the nationally recognized Strive Together Education Advocacy Organization.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, congratulations.
Thanks.
Great. I'm going to open the floor to you. What would you like to tell us about your campaign?
Well, first of all, thank you for doing this in general. I think this is a phenomenal thing that you all are doing, and certainly now more than ever, exposing people to folks who are running for office and the ideas and issues that matter most to the people who are following all of this, I think is really important, and just kudos to you for doing it. I decided to run for city council because you know, I believe that Cincinnati can be one of the best places in the country for children and families, but we're not there. We have one of the highest child poverty rates in the nation, and most of our families are struggling, whether they're living in poverty or they're in the middle class, but they're having a hard time making ends meet, and it's just a very difficult time for children and families. There's a segment of the population that's doing just fine, but you know, for the most part, it's a huge number of children and families that are really struggling. And so I think Cincinnati over the next 5 to 10 years can do any number of things like the Preschool Promise, but go well beyond that to make Cincinnati a much better place for children and families, and that will do a lot in terms of growth and our economy and all the things that we care about in terms of being a vibrant city. I think to do that, we need three things. One is we need folks who are willing to do public service, get involved in politics, who are results-based, who have a track record of getting things done, which I do, and who will get into office and focus entirely on getting things done. That's not typically the norm these days, and I think we've got to get to a place where we're electing people who are there to solve problems and to get things done. The second thing is I think we need a comprehensive agenda for children and families, and that starts prenatally and making sure that every single mom has access to high-quality prenatal care, making sure that families have access to quality child care, making sure that the preschool expansion of that the Preschool Promise will bring is done with excellence. It's making sure that we are integrating our summer learning and after-school programming in a way that makes it all more accessible to families. Youth employment, going from where we are now, which is employing about 100 young people a year, to where we were, which was at one point nearly 500 young people, and making college much more affordable. But we also need to tackle wages. Wages is a huge, huge issue, and getting wages up is going to be at the heart of whether or not we dramatically reduce child poverty in this city. And then finally, public safety. I mean, there's just an enormous amount of crime and violence in many of our neighborhoods, and it's happening sometimes right in front of our kids. And so, tackling those issues will be my focus and part of a larger comprehensive plan to make Cincinnati a much better place for children and families. And then finally, I think politics has veered off course a bit, in the sense that there's a lot of squabbling and bickering and people getting frustrated with each other, and some of it's entirely understandable. But I think in order to get things done, we're going to need people who are bridge builders, who are willing to bring people together, listen, and understand, and then figure out a way to get people working on solutions. And so that's why I'm running, and hopefully you'll vote for me in November.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall I launch into questions?
Sure. Fire away.
Okay. I'll get started with some general questions. What are your exact responsibilities to the city and your constituents?
So it's a great question. I think three. One is this fidelity to them, that at the end of the day, they will always be most important. And I think a lot of people in politics forget that. They think about their own ideas and their own agendas, and I get it. You want to get there and you want to do the things that you're passionate about, but you are absolutely 100% accountable to the people that you serve, whether they voted for you, didn't vote for you, couldn't vote because they're too young. Fidelity to them, that they are always top of mind and they're part of the process, and that they are always included and driving the work that's being done. The second thing is, I think that you have to do the basics well. In the city of Cincinnati, that means making sure that we're paving streets, that we're doing trash collection with excellence, that we're doing everything we can to dramatically reduce crime and violence, by supporting public safety initiatives and community police relations. So, there's a whole host of things, infrastructure and investing in projects like the Western Hills Viaduct, but also just making sure that the city's infrastructure, including some of the police and fire capital needs, are addressed. So the basics, I think, are critical. People expect the city to be well run. The third thing is I think Cincinnati is getting to the point where the expectations are going beyond just doing the basics with excellence and doing big things. And so I think the Preschool Promise is a great example of doing something pretty big, which is to say we went from an idea that every kid should have 2 years of quality preschool to passing the Preschool Promise. And so I'd like us to do some big things as it relates to wages, as it relates to investing in our young people, and as it relates to crime and violence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. You've touched on how you plan to address the needs of every constituent. Do you have concrete ideas about how you would go about doing that without just addressing the needs of your party?
Oh, sure. So let me just the wage piece. I mean, we have in Cincinnati wage ordinances or wage laws that are intended to protect wages, get them up, but we need the ability to monitor whether or not people are pursuing those wage laws, and so I'd like to lead on that, which I think will make a big difference. I think the city has done a good job getting city employees up to $15 an hour, and now I think we've got to work with other institutions and businesses throughout the community to ensure that they're also aspiring to that $15 an hour wage, which can help move people out of poverty. And I think that there's an effort underway, I know there is, to organize some of our businesses around this issue of poverty and making sure that wages is a big part of that conversation. And so those are things that I'll lead on from a wage standpoint. In terms of investing in children, I mean, I think after we make sure we get the preschool piece right, I think childcare is the next big thing. I mean, making sure that families have access to high quality childcare is got to be up next. I think the same is true for access to high quality prenatal care, so that we are reducing the disparities in terms of infant mortality and making sure that every birth is a on-time healthy one, and because that makes a huge difference in terms of the long-term success of that child, and that they have the home supports they need, so that they've got engaged supporting parents, and that we're doing what we need to make sure that that's true. And again, as I mentioned, looking at the youth employment program, working with our private sector partners and getting the number of youth who are employed up significantly, I think is going to have to be a priority. And then on the issue of crime and violence, there are some short-term solutions and long-term. Some of the long-term solutions are investing in young people. Short-term, I think the tackling the opioid issue has to be a top priority, and doing everything in our power to get guns off our streets is, to me, going to be something that should and hopefully will preoccupy the next council.
Okay, great. You talked about bridge building,
yeah,
and being a bridge builder. So this question is going to be particularly relevant to you. How would you heal the current political divide?
So I think part of it is, addressing it like any conflict. You listen first and you try to understand and make sure that people, know that they've been heard. And then I think it's about, two things. One is putting in, front of each of them, things that they can work on together. And I think investing in children and families, and like we did with the Preschool Promise. I mean, people came together to do that. People from we brought business together with labor, the school community with the preschool folks, and folks that don't always get along, but they had something to work on together. So I think that's a big piece, which is put ideas on the table that are going to make a huge difference in the lives of the people who live in the city, and get folks working on those things. The second thing is just persistence. Sometimes we, because there's a squabble, we may, get tired of the issue, or, back away. And I think you just have to keep at it until you get people to a point where they say, okay, we're going to work on this together.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So think in terms of, contention. And then we have a question from the audience about that. Okay. What challenges do you foresee working with others on City Council? And do you have thoughts on how you will work with the variety of voices on City Council to accomplish your goals, make compromises, etc.?
So I get along with almost everyone. So I'm not entirely concerned. I'm not concerned at all, actually, in terms of whether or not I'll be able to get along with folks. I have a great relationship with people on council and just about everybody who's running. So that won't be the issue for me. I think the big issue for me is compromise is tough, and ultimately you got to do it. So I get it, but you enter these things hopefully with big ideas and a goal to fundamentally improve the lives of the people that you're serving. And so it's an important, necessary, but very tough pill to swallow, compromise. So that'll probably be my biggest challenge, but I've done it many, many times. It's just something you get through, and you realize that on the other side of it is action and results, and that's what people expect.
Okay, thank you. Can you guarantee that you are working for your constituents and not special interests, and if so, how?
So I think, the most important thing is to constantly be engaged with the people you serve. And so I think that's the best way to guarantee that you're always working on their behalf. And so, I'll be an incredibly accessible member of council. People can email or call my cell phone. But it also requires being out in the community. I knock on a lot of doors, and you get the best information you can, I think, when you knock on somebody's door and you have a meaningful conversation. I always ask, what's the one thing that's going well in the city that you feel good about, and what's the one thing that you're concerned about? And you get great answers, and they're all authentic, they're all meaningful, and it allows you to pursue the things that are on the minds of the people you serve. And so it's really getting out of City Hall and spending as much time as possible at community councils, at public events, wherever you can be, and knocking on doors. I mean, that makes a big difference. One of the things we did with the Preschool Promise is, we had the idea and we had the framework for the policy, but most of the policy was driven by the community, by providers, by parents, and we did that by doing house parties, hundreds of house parties over the course of several years, community forums, listening sessions. And so I think all good policy is done that way, as opposed to sort of behind the scenes or behind closed doors. And I think that's the best way to ensure that you're always accountable to the people you serve.
Okay. I was going to ask how we can hold you accountable, but I think you've answered that.
Well, I think the other piece on holding people accountable is by being results oriented. I mean, it's saying, look, Landsman said he was going to work on wages. Did he work on wages? And did he bring people together to get wages up? And what are the examples of that work? Landsman said he was going to work on, investing in children. Did he accomplish that? Did he bring people together to do big things for young people and families that are struggling? And the same thing with public safety. So I think you ultimately hold your elected officials accountable based on results. Did they get things done, and were those things that they got done, were they the things that you expected them to get done? So I think that's the best way to hold people accountable.
If you are just tuning in, we are here with Greg Landsman, Cincinnati City Council candidate. If you would like to ask Greg a question, all you have to do is click on the link to the video feed or the video itself. You'll have the option to comment. Just comment with your question and we will stop and ask. All right. So you mentioned that you would allow your constituents to email you or call you on your cell phone?
Yep.
Is that the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my email is greglandsman1@gmail.com.
Okay.
And my cell phone number is 513-646-0186. People can email or call, yeah.
Great. And I didn't mention this at the start, but if you want to know more about Greg, he is on the web at greglandsman.com. He is on Facebook at Landsman for Cincinnati, and he is on Twitter at vote_Landsman. Okay. So what do you have in terms of ideas for moving the city forward in cooperation with City Council?
So again, I think you gotta do the basics and the big things. So that's what I'll focus on. I mean, are we doing the basics with excellence? I think that's what people universally expect of City Hall and City Council. Are streets getting paved, trash getting picked up? Are we safer? Is crime and violence going down? Are we successfully tackling the opioid crisis? I think getting the basics right is a huge priority. I also think we've got to do some big things, and so Cincinnati was a city of firsts for a long time. We had the first baseball team. We had the first fire department. The first female Jewish rabbi was ordained here. All kinds of firsts. We are now the first in the country to provide 2 years of quality preschool for those children who can't afford it. And so, what's the next big thing? And so, as I mentioned, I think making sure that childcare for infant and toddlers is accessible to every single family and not just those who can afford it. I think that making sure that every expecting mom has the prenatal and additional support she may need, I think we've got to really address wages. I mean, there's more around youth that I've talked about, but I think the next decade, if not longer, will be all about whether or not we are rebuilding our middle class and bringing more and more people out of poverty and into the middle class, meaning that wages will be perhaps the single most important issue. Not jobs. I mean, we got to make sure we're always thinking about job creation, but it's the wages of those jobs that are going to matter most. And I think the people who spend the most time on that and who are successful in getting wages up will be successful in public service.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to touch on some hot topics in Cincinnati now.
All right.
Okay, sanctuary city status.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it? Would you keep Cincinnati a sanctuary city?
Yeah, I would. I go to a lot of community councils. I knock on a lot of doors, as I mentioned, and our police department and our fire department, they have honest to goodness issues that they're grappling with day in and day out, and we need all of our resources, local, state, federal, focused on making sure our neighborhoods are safe and helping our police and fire folks accomplish the goals that they have for the city in terms of making our neighborhood safer. So I think we've got to focus entirely on those real issues. And then B, we want to see Cincinnati grow. We want people to live here and want to live here and raise a family here and that requires, among other things, being a welcoming place, a place where people say, okay, I belong here. And so I absolutely think it's something we should continue to pursue.
Okay, great, thank you. Now about racial healing in the community. A lot of people are seeing a problem there. Do you perceive a problem? What would you do about it if so?
Yeah, Cincinnati remains one of the most segregated cities in the country, and I think that's not something we can ignore. And I also think it's something that we can improve or fix. So a couple of things. One is we have a Human Relations Commission that does a lot of good work. I'd love to work with the Human Relations Commission to do all kinds of things that bring people together across race, whether it's by partnering churches together so that congregations of different races are interacting and building relationships on a regular basis, or it's doing community service together across race, so that you're building meaningful social capital across race, so that in 5 years we're not so segregated, that people are working together and they're going to church or synagogue together. They're doing a lot together. I also think that because we're ostensibly a 50-50 city, I mean, half white and half not white, that all of the things we do should represent that diversity. So our budget should represent that diversity. Our boards, public boards, absolutely should represent that diversity. If you're getting money from the city, there should be some incentive or recognition that we want to see your board be as diverse as the city and the communities you're serving. We've never done that, and I think it will make a huge difference. We had a very diverse board and leadership team that led the Preschool Promise, and I think that was at the heart of the success. And the current Preschool Promise board is an incredibly diverse group. If you look at a lot of our boards, they're not diverse at all, and I think that's got to change over the course of the next few years. And I also think the contracting process and the way in which we invest our dollars has to signal to folks that we are absolutely 100% committed to investing in the entire city and not just some of the people in the city. Yeah.
All right. And you have done a lot with education.
Yeah.
How will you help to ensure that public schools are providing comparable education for everyone,
Yep.
regardless of race, regardless of class, regardless of economic status?
Yeah.
How do we keep education competitive for everybody?
So, two things. One is, I think we have to change the way we think about education. We've, I think for the most part, thought about education in the context of what we have now, which is a system where school starts in kindergarten at age 5. Now we're going to start at age 3, which is great. It's a big step in the right direction. And it's really about what happens during the learning day, the school day. But when you think about it, our kids are out of school more than they're in school. So our kids are in school about 163 days out of the year. So again, what's happening when they're not in school? They're only in school for about 7 or 8 hours a day. So what's happening after school? A lot of, most of brain development occurs in the first 5 years. So in addition to the Preschool Promise, what are we doing in the first 1,000 days or the first 3 years of a child's life? So all of those things, I think, are critically important in terms of making education equal. Education is, as it's been said, it is the great equalizer, but it's not at all equal. And in large part because we have not taken that broader viewpoint that education should follow brain development. And that's prenatally and making sure that things are where they need to be at home, making sure that people have access to high-quality childcare, after-school summer learning programs, all of those things. The second thing is I think the city can be a real partner and supporter of our schools, going so far as to set some goals together in terms of what we want to see for every single child, and then pursuing those goals together and being very results based in what we do, and so that's something I hope to lead on.
Okay, all right. I'm going to kind of switch gears to public health.
Okay.
Okay, so you have mentioned the opioid crisis a few times. Thoughts on how to address that?
So I don't think we have the answer at the moment. There are a lot of people doing incredibly good work, and I think there is a general commitment now that this has to be a top priority. One, there's a sort of prevention piece that we ought to be working on to make sure that people don't get addicted in the first place. The second thing is when somebody is addicted, we have this drug Narcan that if somebody overdoses, it has a very high success rate of bringing them back. We then ask them information about themselves. It's not an arrestable offense. You can't arrest somebody for overdosing, and so you can revive them with Narcan and then ask them some questions about where they live, for example, so that you can follow up, which we're starting to do with these quality response teams that are going out with police and addiction services, Talbert House, to try to find those folks who have overdosed and get them into treatment. The challenge is twofold. One is most of the data is not reliable. We're just getting started, so it's something that I think can be easily, or at least certainly, resolved. But of the 20 people that they go out and see each week, they may be able to find 2 or 3, and then getting them into treatment is not as hard as one might think. The second challenge is we don't have enough beds. It's a multi-year process. It takes 2 years for the brain to heal. So we don't have all of the answers yet. I think it's going to require the city and the county coming together with experts to say, okay, what is our short and long term game plan here to fundamentally reduce this and because it's causing a huge burden in terms of to our children, to our communities, to our public safety departments. So and it's a tragic situation that's going to require a lot of attention.
Okay. We've had a few questions come in, so we're going to backtrack to some previous topics we've talked about. For instance, prenatal care.
Yeah.
You got anything on your mind as far as specific programs?
So we have 2 things that are happening in Cincinnati. We have lots of things happening. But the 2 I mentioned, one is we're starting to invest in community health workers that are out in the community and knocking on doors and finding expecting moms who need additional help and making sure they have access to that prenatal care, which I think is really important. And 2, we've had for a long time a program called Every Child Succeeds, which helps moms prenatally and then for the first couple of years to ensure that they are seeing their obstetrician, and that leads to and they're not smoking, or they're getting the help they need. Maybe they have a drug or alcohol addiction, or any number of barriers that have to be eliminated to ensure that we have an on-time healthy birth, which in and of itself is a huge milestone for a child, as opposed to a baby showing up prematurely and with a low birth weight, all kinds of issues that materialize. So I think investing in those things, Every Child Succeeds, for example, is serving about 20% of the moms who need it, and it's highly effective. For the moms that they do serve, they've eliminated the disparity in terms of infant mortality rates, and much better birth outcomes, much better situations for the moms, and the kids show up to preschool ready, right? Which is really important. So, it's like having so we know it works, right? And it's like, as somebody said once to me, it's like having a vaccine. You know it works, but we've decided to only give it to 20% of the people who need it, and so that's got to change.
Okay. Well, you haven't decided to just apply this program to only 20%. That's just how many you're reaching right now, right?
That's
okay.
what funding allows for,
Yeah.
But, I mean, as a community, as a society, we've decided through our budgets that get passed every year that we're only going to fund these programs in a way that allows them to cover 20% of the people who need it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I agree. It needs to be fixed. All right. How do you feel about the development in OvertheRhine? And what would you have done or will you do differently, if anything?
So, I mean, I think the big question there is affordable housing. And so I think there's a lot that's being worked on to ensure that that when we do this kind of revitalization work, that we're doing it with a real commitment to affordable housing. And so I think that's starting to play out in terms of new development and investments in other neighborhoods. And so I think that's a big piece of making sure that these communities remain accessible to all families and not just those who, now have the money to live there. I think the affordable housing piece is a big piece of what happens moving forward in terms of all of the revitalization work that needs to happen in neighborhoods across the city. I think it's good in the sense that it brings a lot of revenue, and people are excited about the city, and we've got all these young people who are deciding to stay in Cincinnati or move back, and that's a good thing for the city. The question is, in addition to the affordable housing piece and whether or not we're making these neighborhoods and OvertheRhine as accessible as possible, is what are we doing to ensure that all these young people, when they start to have families, stay in Cincinnati? And access to high quality childcare, access to high quality preschool, making sure we're investing wisely in our schools so that every neighborhood has great schools. Access to after school and summer learning programming, all of that will convince young people to say, hey, we're gonna stay here and we're gonna raise our family here, and that's how you grow.
Okay. And we have a question, what will you do to make neighborhoods safer? This person specifically mentions Westwood.
So, I was just in Westwood last week, and I mean, I got to tell you, Westwood, Price Hill, several other neighborhoods. I'm in Mount Washington. Several years ago, the public safety reports that police and fire did would take up maybe 10 minutes of the agenda. And now it's 30, 45 minutes of the agenda in these community councils. And so I think it's really important for people to realize that this is something very real that our neighborhoods are grappling with. And while some of the crime and violence statistics may be down, across the board or in certain neighborhoods, in some neighborhoods, it's the number one issue. And so I think, supporting our police and fire, making sure that we have as many police, on patrol and engaged in the community is really important. We're getting new technology to make sure that when there is a shooting that our folks are on the scene as quickly as possible, so that we're getting those folks into custody. And I believe that because we can't, there's just certain things we can't do in terms of getting guns off the street because of federal law. Making sure that those folks who do commit a crime, gun-related crime, are that we're leveraging all of the federal laws that we have at our disposal to ensure that they know that Cincinnati is not a place to commit a crime with a gun, and that gets those folks and the guns off the street, and it also sends a signal that we're getting serious about guns. The heroin issue, obviously, as I mentioned, has to be tackled in a way that takes on some of the best practices and also includes us taking risks. I mean, it's just such an enormous problem. There's also these long-term solutions that I think you absolutely have to do. giving kids 2 years of quality preschool will make a big difference. The fact that we went from 500 young people accessing youth employment opportunities to 100 is an issue, and we have to address that. We've got to get more young people working, and those jobs have to pay decent wages. So investing in young people, I think, is a big piece. And then the blight and issue, the litter, this new housing court that hopefully will get up and running as soon as possible, I think will help so that we have something to hold absentee landlords accountable, some mechanism to hold them accountable so that we're dramatically reducing blight and litter, which attracts crime and violence.
Okay. At this point, I'm going to give a shout out to our interpreters again, who are admirably keeping up with us. We are talking very quickly, and I know that's difficult. We've had a few questions come in. If you are wondering how you can ask a question, click on the video feed or the link to the video feed. You should be able to comment with your question, and we will stop and ask. I know this video is appearing in posts on Facebook. Keep in mind that if you comment on the post or below the post, that we cannot see. So if you're doing that and we're not asking your question, that's why we can't actually see it. So remember to comment on the video feed. And thank you for accommodating our live questions.
Yeah, cool.
All right, so we're talking about law enforcement issues. Another one that our group members have asked is, do you support training for law enforcement officers in so they don't racially profile, so they know how to handle domestic abuse, so they know how to handle mental illness?
Yeah, so we're in the process of updating the collaborative agreement now, and I think one of the big pieces will hopefully be around additional support and training, so that and we've come a long way because of the training, because of the collaborative agreement, and so I think that has made a big difference. It's obviously time to update it. That's what's happening now, and hopefully we do all that we can to support our police officers so they have everything they need to serve in the way in which I know that they want to and that we need them to. There's an effort in Louisville that I've been really interested in over the last couple of years. The mayor of Louisville ran several years ago on a platform that included compassion. That economic development was really important, education was really important, but to do all of those things, that Louisville had to be a much more compassionate city, and I think that's true for Cincinnati. And there is a whole compassion council that does all kinds of work throughout the community. And in addition to these days of service and other great things that I think are helping to bring people together, they are bringing in trainings to support teachers and law enforcement officials around compassion and empathy and sort of fundamentally understanding what somebody might be going through so that you're more likely to engage in the best way possible. And so it's been really effective in Louisville, and we've seen some of that here, both in our schools and with our police department, but I'd love to see more of it.
Okay. I was just going to ask you a question and the screen flashed and not. Oh, you mentioned collaborative agreement.
Yeah.
For the audience members who don't necessarily know what that is, could you just give us a quick overview?
Yeah, so by no means am I an expert in the collaborative agreement, but that 15 years ago, 2001, there were these riots or this civil unrest, an enormous amount of frustration at the result of the way in which the police were engaging the community, particularly the black community. There were, I think, some 15 shootings of police officers, including the one that sort of sparked everything, a young man named Timothy Thomas. And it was clear that among other things that needed to happen to heal the city and to change the way that the police and the community engaged one another, that there was going to have to be some changes. And so the city entered into a collaborative agreement that focuses on any number of things, including training and conduct, and a thing that is oftentimes overlooked, which is something called problem solving. This approach of police problem solving, so that every issue isn't sort of seen as just sort of a law enforcement issue, but how do you actually bring all of the folks that are involved together to solve the problem? And it's a hugely effective tool that we use sometimes, but probably not as much as we could.
Okay. Regarding the shootings you mentioned, do you recognize any unjust police shootings in recent years, and if so, which ones?
Well, the Tensing shooting obviously was unjust. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. That, and it was a University of Cincinnati police officer, and they are now pursuing reforms as a result, wisely and necessarily so. But until it's I think the same as or better than what we are seeing with our Cincinnati Police Department in terms of the collaborative agreement and all the progress that they've made. I think we're going to have to keep an eye on it, because they do have police officers who carry a badge and a gun, and they've got to be as trained as anyone else who's carrying a badge and a gun. So, we've done obviously in recent years better than other cities, because you're seeing this happening other places in a way you don't hear. But I don't think there's anyone that wants to see any of it happen ever. And so I think it's a matter of bringing everyone together and staying as collaborative, no pun intended, as possible, so that that we're constantly getting better at this, and we're doing it in a way that lifts one another up, whether it's the police or the community, because it's when we're working together that we achieve the best results.
Okay, all right. Just a reminder to everybody out there, we are coming up on about 10 minutes away from wrapping up here. And if you have any questions for Greg about a topic we've already covered or one we haven't covered, get it in now so that we have time to see it and ask. And we want to make sure we honor your questions.
We haven't had a transportation question yet.
Would you like a transportation question?
I would like a transportation question.
We can skip to transportation. I got a whole section here on transportation.
Yeah.
How would you alleviate poverty in Cincinnati through transportation solutions?
So I think we have a very important opportunity over the course of the next year or two to envision a modernized public transit system, one that connects people to jobs and makes sure that our jobs are accessible to people. And there's a need to invest in Metro. We know that there are serious issues. I mean, something like 40% of the jobs in the region aren't accessible now, so we've got to make this a big priority. Obviously, accessing these jobs is going to be really important. I still think wages is something that I'm going to keep coming back to, because at the end of the day, the job has to pay a great wage, or at least a living wage. I would love to see Metro and all of the folks who support public transit begin to engage the community in a process to envision a revamped, totally modernized public transit system. So going beyond just the idea of, well, we have to invest in Metro in order to just stay afloat, right? I mean, you got buses that need to be replaced, and you've got routes that are going to be eliminated and without new money. So there's that sort of let's get to a place where we're just sort of staying afloat. I think there is a even better place where we've really, modernized the public transit system in this city in a way that makes all of the other things we do possible. So I hope over the next couple of months, and it may take a year or two, we do that envisioning work, and I hope to be part of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of our watchers wants to know if you support streetcar expansion.
So, I think any opportunity to connect the streetcar to other business districts is something that people want to see. But I also think that integrating our existing public transit system in a way that better connects, the streetcar stops at Government Square, and using those bus routes in a way that gets people out of that downtown loop and into our neighborhoods is something I think we ought to look at. If UC, for example, is willing to step up, or the uptown community, like the University of Arizona did in Tucson, to build that part, then that would be, I think, a good thing. At the moment, I think making sure that the downtown route, is successful is what folks have to focus on. I also think the larger public transit issue is got to take priority. And in terms of investing additional resources, I just think we have at the moment just a ton of stuff we've got to get done, from street paving to investing in our people and our young people, and better wages.
Do you feel like the current bus system is sufficiently accessible to people with disabilities, or would you make improvements on that?
I don't know the answer to that question. I suspect that we can always improve. So my sense is that would be part of the envisioning process. What do we need to do better in terms of making sure it's accessible to people with disabilities? So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You have talked a lot about initiatives that would afford prenatal care
Yep.
to women. Let's talk a little bit about other programs that help with women's health care.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Planned Parenthood? Do you support it in
Yep.
Cincinnati?
Yeah, so I'm a supporter. I come from a family of big supporters. My grandmother was on the national board of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood provides vital healthcare services to women, and so it's very important to me. I also think we've got to think about, we talk about reproductive rights, but we also have to start talking about reproductive freedom and justice, and that gets into whether or not there's real equity and in terms of what moms have access to when they do have children. And there are enormous disparities now in terms of access to quality prenatal care and to child care and all of the supports that middle and upper class moms have that lower income moms just don't have. And we've seen other communities do a really good job of making sure that all moms have those things, and I'd like to help lead on that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Good to hear. All right. A little bit about the environment, if we can touch on that real
Sure.
quickly before we wrap up. What plans do you have for the kind of ongoing battle that's going on between the city and county with the
MSD.
sewer systems? Yeah.
So it's one is we've got to make sure that the rates aren't going up anymore. We're going to hit a ceiling. Fortunately, that means that under the consent decree, rates can only go up so much. We're about at that ceiling. But then we have to figure out ways to get rates back down because it's a huge burden on families. Now, obviously, we have to update our the MSD system. The big piece, I think, is around these EPA waivers and getting the EPA to allow us to pursue more green-focused ways of updating the system. So you can just lay big pipe. These very expensive pipes that we're updating, But there are also a lot of ways to alleviate pressure on the system that are much more green friendly, and they save people money. But it requires us going to the EPA and getting waivers, and sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not. I think that's a big piece of people coming together around that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are about at time, so I am just going to very briefly remind you that if you missed any portion of this live broadcast, we will be posting the link. You can watch the whole thing in its entirety. Do check out other events in our series, past and coming up. And now I am going to let Greg wrap up. Anything you'd like to touch on in conclusion?
I think just again to say thank you for doing this, having me on certainly, but just doing it in general. I think this is a great service that you're providing to voters, and to ask people to go to the website greglandsman.com and get involved. I think we have an opportunity to change the way we do business in this city pretty significantly with new leadership that's committed to bringing people together, to solving the big problems, making sure that the basics are covered too. And so I think this is a really important election. We're kind of focused on a lot of folks are focused on the mayor's race, but there's a great field of candidates running for council, and it's not going to be hard finding several that you like. And so hopefully I'll be one of those people, and you'll vote for me in November. And I promise to work my tail off and to do it in a way that gets things done. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate
of
it.
course. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Thank you for joining us, and please join us again in the future.